There is a moment at camp that happens almost every summer, usually without much attention. The campfire is over, the songs have ended, the last embers are glowing quietly in the darkness. Scouts drift back towards their campsites, still laughing, still talking, and still carrying the feeling of the evening with them. And then, eventually, someone stays behind. Someone makes sure the fire is out safely. Someone stacks the benches back into place. Someone prepares the area so another group can return tomorrow night and do it all over again. Most campers never think about that part. But the truth is, camp only continues because someone always prepares for the next campfire. And maybe that idea says something larger about camp itself. Because camps do not sustain themselves automatically. Traditions do not continue simply because they once existed. The experiences we remember from camp, the friendships, the leadership, the connection, and the sense of belonging continue only because generation after generation chooses to sustain them. In this episode, I want to talk about what it really takes to sustain camp. Not just financially, not just organizationally, but emotionally, culturally, and personally, because sustaining camp is ultimately about people. It's about participation. It's about presence. And maybe, most importantly, it's about making sure future generations still have the opportunity to experience something meaningful around their own next campfire. Welcome to Meet Me at the Grizz. I'm Ken Clough, and this podcast is a place for stories, reflections, and conversations about scouting, camp, leadership, service, and the experiences that continue shaping us long after the summer ends. This episode is inspired in part by the themes explored in my recent books, Our Week at Rotary Scout Reservation and The Next Campfire. But this episode is not really about the books themselves. It's about something larger. What it means to sustain camp experiences for future generations, and why those experiences still matter today. So, let's sit down around the campfire together and talk about what it really takes to sustain camp. Why camp matters beyond summer. One of the fascinating things about camp is how long it stays with people. People forget a lot of things over the course of their lives. We forget details. We forget schedules. We forget routines. Entire years sometimes blur together. But camp memories often remain remarkably vivid. People remember the smell of the woods after the rain. They remember walking to flags in the morning. They remember songs around campfires and the sounds of the dining hall, the feeling of finally passing a swim test, or staying up too late, talking quietly and tense long after lights out. And what is interesting is that many of these memories people carry from camp are not necessarily the big moments. Often, it's the small moments that stay with us. A conversation, a friendship, a mentor, a late-night campfire, a moment of encouragement, a feeling of belonging. Camp matters because it creates experiences that shape identity and connection during important moments in young people's lives. For many scouts, camp is one of the first places where they begin discovering their independence. It may be the first time they're spending significant time away from home. It may be the first place where they are responsible for themselves in new ways. It may be the first place where they discover leadership, or confidence, or community. Camp also creates something increasingly rare in modern life: intergenerational connection. Young scouts learn from older scouts. Staff mentor campers. Leaders pass down traditions that were once passed down to them. Stories move from one generation to another almost organically. And perhaps that is part of why camp creates such lasting emotional connections. Camp is not simply an activity. It becomes part of people's personal history. When people return to camp years later, they are often reconnecting with younger versions of themselves. They remember who they were. They remember who helped shape them. They remember moments that mattered. And because camp matters this deeply, sustaining it matters too. Not because we're trying to preserve nostalgia, but because these experiences still have value. Young people still need connection. They still need mentorship. They still need places where they can grow, struggle, lead, fail, laugh, and belong. And that brings us to an important reality. Camp continues because people continue investing in it. Camps are sustained through participation. One of the things people sometimes overlook is that camps do not simply exist on their own. Every summer camp experience is supported by an enormous amount of quiet stewardship happening behind the scenes. Someone maintains the buildings. Someone prepares the campsites. Someone trains staff. Someone organizes programs. Someone coordinates logistics. Someone gives time, energy, leadership, and care to sustain the experience. And most of that work happens quietly. Camp survives because people continue showing up. Staff return summer after summer because they believe in the experience. Volunteers dedicate weekends to improving facilities or supporting programs. Parents prioritize sending their children to camp because they understand the value of the experience. Alumni stay connected because camp remains meaningful to them long after their youth. Camp is sustained collectively. No single person preserves camp alone. And honestly, that collective stewardship may be one of the most beautiful parts of camp culture. There is something powerful about people across generations contributing to something larger than themselves. A young staff member teaching waterfront today may one day become the volunteer helping renovate the waterfront years later. A scout attending camp today may someday return as a leader, or donor, or mentor. A parent dropping their child off nervously for the first week at camp may later become one of the strongest advocates for the experience. Camp creates continuity because people continue investing in it over time. And yes, modern life creates challenges. People are busy. Schedules are crowded. Young people are surrounded by constant distractions and competing priorities. But perhaps that makes camp even more important now, because camp offers something increasingly difficult to find elsewhere. And maybe the most important part of sustaining camp is making sure young people continue actually experiencing camp directly. Because without participation, the experience itself eventually fades. Scouts need to attend. Why presence matters. One of the themes I explored in the book, The Next Campfire, was the idea that camp gives young people an opportunity to unplug from modern life and reconnect with people in meaningful ways. And I think that idea matters deeply right now. We live in a world filled with constant connection, but sometimes very little actual presence. Young people today are surrounded by notifications, screens, algorithms, entertainment, and endless digital stimulation. Attention is constantly fragmented. Silence is rare. Reflection is rare. Even boredom is rare. But camp interrupts that cycle. At camp, something different happens. Phones become less important. Conversations become longer. People become more present. Scouts begin reconnecting with the world around them. They reconnect with nature. They reconnect with friendships. They reconnect with themselves. And importantly, they reconnect with real human interaction. One of the things camp still does incredibly well is create shared experiences. People eat together, work together, laugh together, struggle together, and live together. Those experiences build relationships in ways that digital interaction often cannot. A campfire conversation is different from a group chat. A hike is different from scrolling. A late-night conversation in a campsite is different from a social media interaction. Camp creates real-world connection. And I think many adults recognize how badly young people still need spaces like that today. The interesting thing is that scouts themselves often do not realize how much they need it until they experience it. You can almost watch the transition happen during a week at camp. At first, some scouts arrive still mentally attached to home, to phones, to routines, or to distractions. But gradually, camp slows them down. They begin engaging differently. They become more comfortable talking face to face. They become more confident. They become more willing to participate. Quiet scouts often begin finding their place. Leadership emerges naturally. Friendships deepen. Confidence grows. And perhaps most importantly, young people begin discovering who they are outside the constant noise of modern life. That is one of the reasons attendance matters so much. Camp cannot simply survive as an idea or memory. Young people have to experience it directly. You cannot preserve the experience of camp without young people experiencing camp. The future of camp depends on scouts actually attending camp, participating fully, and becoming part of the culture and community that make camp meaningful in the first place. Because ultimately, camp only works when people are fully present in it. The people who sustain camp. Of course, sustaining camp also depends on the people who continue supporting the experience across generations. And one of the remarkable things about camp culture is how many different people contribute to sustaining it. Staff play an enormous role. Every summer, young staff members dedicate incredible amounts of time and energy to creating meaningful experience for campers. They become teachers, mentors, role models, and leaders. They shape camp culture in ways that often last far beyond a single summer. Many staff members return year after year because camp becomes part of who they are. Volunteers sustain camp too. There are people who quietly dedicate weekends, evenings, and countless hours behind the scenes helping camps continue operating successfully. Committee members, service volunteers, leaders, commissioners, alumni. Many of these individuals work without much recognition simply because they believe in the importance of the experience. Parents also sustain camp. Every parent who prioritizes camp attendance, encourages participation, or trusts the experience enough to send their child away for a week becomes part of the sustaining camp culture. And that trust matters. Alumni sustain camp through stories, mentorship, financial support, advocacy, and continued connection. Many former campers return because camp shaped them deeply, and they want future generations to have similar experiences. And donors help sustain camp by preserving access and opportunity for future generations. Scholarships, facilities, program improvements. All of these things help ensure camp remains accessible and meaningful for young people in the future. When you step back and look at it, camp is really sustained through collective stewardship. Thousands of people contributing in different ways over long periods of time. And perhaps that is one of the strongest reasons camp communities often feel so strong. People are connected not only through memories, but through shared responsibility. Why camp still matters today. Sometimes people talk about camp purely through the lens of nostalgia. But I think camp matters for reasons that are still incredibly relevant today. Camp offers something increasingly rare: presence, connection, responsibility, and community. Young people need spaces where they can interact face to face, work together, solve problems together, and experience life beyond screens and schedules. Camp creates opportunities for growth that are difficult to replicate elsewhere. At camp, young people often encounter manageable challenges that help build confidence and resilience. They learn leadership. They learn teamwork. They learn responsibility. They learn how to live in community with others. And importantly, camp often creates spaces where people feel like they belong. That sense of belonging matters, especially today. Camp also creates continuity across generations. Traditions, songs, stories, values, and experiences that get passed forward over time. And that continuity creates identity and connection. But again, the goal is simply not preserving the past. The goal is making sure future generations still have opportunities to experience something meaningful themselves. Every generation deserves its own campfires, its own stories, its own memories, its own moments of growth and connection. And that is why sustaining camp still matters. What sustaining camp actually looks like. Sometimes when people hear the phrase sustaining camp, they imagine huge organizational efforts or major financial campaigns. And while those things certainly matter, sustaining camp often happens through much simpler actions. It happens when leaders encourage scouts to attend camp. It happens when parents prioritize the experience. It happens when volunteers give a weekend of service. It happens when staff return for another summer. It happens when alumni tell stories about why camp matters to them. It happens when older scouts mentor younger scouts. It happens when people continue showing up. Sustaining camp is really about participation. It's about choosing to invest in experiences that continue shaping young people in meaningful ways. And importantly, sustaining camp is not only about preserving places. It's about preserving opportunities for connection, leadership, growth, friendship, and belonging. And that may ultimately be what camp gives people most. Not simple memories, but experiences that continue shaping who they become. The Next Campfire. One of the reasons I wrote Our Week at Rotary Scout Reservation and The Next Campfire was that I came to realize that storytelling is also part of sustaining camp. Stories preserve experiences. Stories preserve traditions. Stories preserve values and memories and moments that might otherwise slowly disappear over time. Long after another summer ends, stories help carry the meaning of camp forward. And maybe that is the part of what sustaining camp really means. Not simply preserving a place, but preserving experiences, relationships, traditions, and connections worth passing on to future generations. Somewhere this summer, a scout will sit around a campfire for the very first time. Years from now, they may still remember that moment. The laughter, the songs, the friendships, and the feeling of being fully present. And maybe one of the most important things any of us can do is continue telling those stories and sharing those experiences so future generations understand why camp still matters. So maybe that is the invitation right now. Tell your story. Share the moments that stayed with you. Pass the experience forward, because every campfire eventually becomes the next campfire. If this episode resonated with you, I hope you'll share it with someone who understands the value of camp, scouting, leadership, and the experiences that continue shaping us long after summer ends. And wherever you are right now, I hope there is still a little campfire somewhere in your memory, reminding you why these experiences matter. Until next time, I'll meet you at the Grizz.